Alrighty then, we are back here again. Welcome back, everybody, to the Tolkien-centered podcast called Exploring Arda. As usual, I will be your host, Jackson. And together, hold on, I'm kind of set up everything because the intro music is a little new to me. It's a new segment that I'm trying to at least incorporate into the show because everybody has intros. So we'll see how it goes from there because my software equipment is very limited, as you can tell from the audio quality to everything that surround. Like I try to do like background music, whatnot. Yeah, it's just a work in progress until I get better stuff. Otherwise, this is my project. Exploring Arda is my sort of project going on here, and I was able to record a few episodes, and now that I have a little bit of time here, I'm going to be recording this next episode, the third chapter of the Silmarillion. And before I actually get into the story and whatnot, for me, I always got to do the whole plug-in where I talk about my other show called Drink and Dried with my friend, and we talk about nerdy stuff from movies to shows to D&D. So if you've heard all of the other episodes so far, you'll notice that that's kind of a trend in the introduction. So, yeah, because there's really not much for an introduction, really. If you've listened to the introduction of this show, then you'll know what it's all about, and I pretty much make sure that the audience knows what it's all about when I do every single episode, just in case if someone jumps in on the latest episode and kind of sees what everything's about. So, with that all being said, I'm going to try to have the music a little louder this time around, but we'll see how that all goes. It's usually going to be like the same ambient, fantasy ambient that I use each time, just because it's reliable, and it's like an hour long, and I don't think any of my episodes will get to an hour long, unless if it's like the whole overview of the Silmarillion, of the whole book, or perhaps maybe one of the favorite chapters of mine later on. We'll see how it goes. So now we get to the fun part. We get back to the book here, and I'm going to try to make sure the mic is not right close to me so you guys can all hear me very well as I stutter over the story. That's also a common theme around here, so I'll try my best not to do that, but we'll see about that too. So Chapter 3 here is called Of the Coming of the Elves and the Captivity of Melkor. So let's begin here. Through long ages the Valar dwelt in bliss in the light of the trees beyond the mountains of Aman, but all Middle-earth lay in a twilight under the stars. While the lamps had shone, growth began there which now was checked, because all was again dark. Not even the first sentence. Here we go. But already the oldest living things had arisen, in the seas the great weeds, and on earth the shadow of great trees, and in the valleys of the night-clad hills there were dark creatures old and strong. To those lands and forests the Valar seldom came, save only Yavanna and Orome, and Yavanna would walk there in the shadows, grieving because the growth and promise of the spring of Arda was stayed. And she sat asleep upon many things that had arisen in the spring, so that they should not age, but wait for a time of awakening that yet should be. But in the north Melkor built his strength, and he slept not, but watched and labored. And the evil things that he had perverted walked abroad, and the dark and slumbering woods were haunted by monsters and shapes of dread. And in Autumno he gathered his demons about him, those spirits who first adhered to him in the days of his splendor, and became most like him in his corruption. Their hearts were of fire, but they were cloaked in darkness, and terror went before them. They had whips of flame. Balrogs they were named in Middle-earth in later days. And in that dark time Melkor bred many other monsters of diverse shapes. Maybe it's diverse shapes, because it might have been spelled wrong here. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Sorry. Melkor bred many other monsters of possibly diverse shapes and kinds that long troubled the world, and his realm spread now ever southward over Middle-earth. And Melkor made also a fortress and armory not far from the northwestern shores of the sea, to resist any assault that might come from Aman. That stronghold was commanded by Sauron, lieutenant of Melkor, and it was named Angband. Alright, so, yeah, we get the this first part here is that there's a big corruption of Middle-earth, all because of Melkor's undoing and all of his darkness, and of course he doesn't sleep. Naturally, as an evil villain does. You know, you don't sleep and you just make a lot of dark stuff and monsters and shapes of dread. And of course, the Balrogs were like his most famous demon that he created. Obviously, and it lasts for technically like 3 ages because Lord of the Rings is at the end of the third age, and there's still a Balrog left alive in Moria. So these things, Balrogs, which is the whole uh, rumor, I don't know, theory. There we go. Theory that Balrogs are Maiar because they were corrupted by Melkor, and of course Maiar live apparently a ridiculously long time. So yeah, that's a terrible thing to really go against. So I see why he made all that stuff. And we get another reference to Orome again, who's the monster hunter. Obviously, he would be the one staying in Middle-earth, slaying all these dark creatures and demons and all that stuff, because that's just what he does. Him and his horse Nahar, they're... I don't know. Maybe they are. Maybe he is becoming my favorite Valar. I'm not sure. It's a close one, but he's really cool. And then of course Yavanna, like we said it in the last chapter when she was speaking with Manwë, because she was really she was sad because she knew that all that she was gonna make was gonna be marred by Melkor, and of course it was. She sees all that darkness in the forest, in the woods, and yeah, she just pretty much just mourns over everything that she did create, but now it's like dead, dying, or being twisted and polluted and all that stuff. So just a little side note for that. And of course it ends here with Sauron being, lieutenant of Angband. So back to it here. It came to pass that the Valar held council, for they became troubled by the tidings that Yavanna and Orome brought from the outer lands. And Yavanna spoke before the Valar, saying, Ye mighty of Arda, the vision of Iluvatar was grief and soon taken away, so that maybe we cannot guess within a narrow count of days the hour appointed. Yet be sure of this, the hour approaches, and within this age our hope shall be revealed, and the children shall awake. Shall we then leave the lands of their dwelling desolate and full of evil? Shall they walk in darkness while we have light? Shall they call Melkor Lord while Manwë sits upon Taniquetzal? And Tolkas cried, Nay, let us make war swiftly. Have we not rested from strife overlong, and is not our strength now renewed? Shall one alone contest with us forever? But at the beginning of Manwë, Mandos spoke, and he said, In this age the children of Iluvatar shall come indeed, but they come not yet. Moreover, it is doom... Oh, hold on, now it's becoming loud. Moreover, it is doom that the firstborn shall come in the darkness, and shall look first upon the stars. Great light shall be for their waning. To Varda ever shall they call at need. And it is kind of true, because if you guys recall back to the other one, Varda was called Elbereth, which is, she's the Lady of the Stars. And it's part of my ending, that may the light of Elbereth be with you. It's because the elves hold Elbereth in. That's what they do. They look upon the stars, and the light of Elbereth is like the holiest thing that they can get to the heavens. So back to it here. Then Varda went forth from the council, and she looked out from the height of Taniquetzal, and beheld the darkness of Middle-earth beneath the innumerable stars, faint and far. Then she began a great labor, greatest of all the works of the Valar since their coming into Arda. She took the silver dews from the vats of Telperion, and therewith she made new stars, and brighter against the coming of the firstborn. Wherefore she whose name out of the deeps of time in the labors of Ea was Tintale, the kindler, was called after by the elves Elentari, queen of the stars. Carnel and Luinil, Nenar and Lumbar, Alcarinque and Elamire she wrought in that time, and many other of the ancient stars she gathered together and set as signs in the heavens of Arda. Wilwarin, Telemendil, Soranume, and Anarima, and Menelmakar with his shining belt that forebodes the last battle that shall be at the end of the days. And high in the north, as a challenge to Melkor, she set the crown of 7 mighty stars to swing. Valakirka, the sickle of the Valar and sign of doom. It is told that even as Varda ended her labors, and they were long, when first Menelmakar strode up the sky in the blue fire of Helluin, flickered in the mists above the borders of the world. In that hour, the children of the earth awoke, the firstborn of Iluvatar. By the starlit mirror of Kuivienen, Kuivienen, water of awakening, they rose from the sleep of Iluvatar, and while they dwelt yet silent by Kuivienen, their eyes beheld first of all things the stars of heaven. Therefore they have ever loved the starlight, and have revered Varda Elantari above all the Valar. So, yeah, it's basically the whole awakening of the children and what they're surrounded by and what they foresee, which is why the elves love both the water and the stars, because that's what they beheld in their first awakening hours. Which, yeah, that would make sense, if they see all this beautiful stuff and they're like, oh, wow, the Valar made it. Of course they would look up to them. It's like, it just makes sense to me. So we get kind of like the reason why the elves are so divine, or at least considered more closely to the divine. I should say that probably. Also, all of those names are very hard to pronounce like out loud. When I read it, I can actually go over it a few times and guess what it might sound like. But reading it first time is very hard. So back to it again here. In the changes of the world, the shapes of land and of seas have been broken and remade. Rivers have not kept their courses, neither have mountains remained steadfast. And to Kuivenin there is no returning, but it is said among the elves that it lay far off in the east of Middle-earth, and northward, and it was a bay in the inland sea of Helkar. And that sea stood where aforetime the roots of the mountains of Iluwin had been before Melkor overthrew it. Many waters flowed down thither from heights in the east, and the first sound that was heard by the elves was the sound of water flowing, and the sound of water falling over stone. Long they dwelt in their first home by the water under stars, and they walked the earth in wonder, and they began to make speech and to give names to all things that they perceived. Themselves they named the Quendi, signifying those that speak with voices, for as yet they had met no other living things that spoke or sang. So just another thing that they pretty much have their own community, and they're like, well, okay, we're gonna stay together for the first few years here, because it's definitely beautiful, but we also don't know what else is out there and how much is out there. So at first, also I understand, because it's like a new people, brand new, born like just like that, and they began farming their own language and whatnot. Obviously surveying the lands beyond is going to take a while. So, back to it here. And on a time it chanced that Orome rode eastward in his hunting, and he turned north by the shores of Helkar and passed under the shadows of the Orakarni, the mountains of the east. Then on a sudden Nahar set up a great neighing and stood still. And Orome wondered and sat silent, and it seemed to him that in the quiet of the land under the stars he heard afar off many voices singing. Thus it was that the Valar found at last, as it were by chance, those whom they had so long awaited. And Orome, looking upon the elves, was filled with wonder, as though they were beings sudden and marvelous and unforeseen. For so it shall ever be with the Valar. From without the world, through all things may be forethought in music or foreshown in vision from afar, to those who enter verily into Ea, which each in its time shall be met at unawares as something new and unforetold. In the beginning, the elder children of Iluvatar were stronger and greater than they have since become, but not more fair, for though the beauty of the Quendi in the days of their youth was beyond all other beauty that Iluvatar has caused to be, it has not perished, but lives in the west, and sorrow and wisdom have enriched it. And Orome loved the Quendi, and named them in their own tongue Eldar, the people of the stars, but that name was after borne only by those who followed him upon the western road. So basically, we get here that the Valar are just in absolute stunning fascination of the children of Iluvatar, and Orome found them just out of chance, basically. He's just kind of like riding, I wonder what kind of creatures I'm going to kill next. What kind of shadowy depths am I going to have to go into just to slay another monster? And then, oh, look at that, singing. And then he beholds the children of Iluvatar, just like that. So I feel like that was a really great way of actually introducing the Valar with the elves, this like sudden and unexpected thing, and I think that just like makes the Valar just appreciate them more because they were already there. But they're like, oh, they can talk and sing and make a name for themselves already. Like just like the whole concept of Iluvatar and his thoughts and all that stuff. It's just it's amazing. So back to it here. Yet many of the Quendi were filled with dread at his coming, and this was the doing of Melkor. For by after knowledge the wise declare that Melkor, ever watchful, was first aware of the awakening of the Quendi, and sent shadows and evil spirits to spy upon them and waylay them. So it came to pass some years ere the coming of Orome, that if any of the elves strayed far abroad, alone or few together, that they would often vanish and never return. And the Quendi said that the hunter had caught them, and they were afraid. And indeed the most ancient songs of the elves, of which echoes are remembered still in the west, tell of the shadow shapes that walked in the hills above Cuivennen, or would pass suddenly over the stars, and of the dark rider upon his wild horse that pursued those that wandered to take them and devour them. Now Melkor greatly hated and feared the riding of Orome, and either he sent indeed his dark servants as riders, or he sent lying whispers abroad, for the purpose that the Quendi should shun Orome, if ever they should meet. Thus it was that when Nahar neighed, and Orome indeed came among them, some of the Quendi hid themselves, and some fled and were lost. But those that had courage and stayed perceived swiftly that the great rider was no shape out of darkness, for the light of Aman was in his face, and all the noblest of the elves were drawn towards it. Yeah, really, really cool stuff, especially if you really like dark, dark fantasy, kind of like a little bit of horror mixed like, well, actually more of like terror, because everybody starts going missing because of all these what I would call shadow people. But this is also Arda, so kind of make it what you want. But this is like very like ghostly apparitions. He sends like dark spirits and well, just like dark servants pretty much. And this mention of a dark rider, of course, always reminds me of like the Nazgul, which aren't gonna. I don't think they're gonna appear in the Silmarillion. If I think I might be wrong about that, so don't don't call me out on that one. But dark riders upon wild horses, it just reminds me of Ringwraiths so much. But all these dark spirits taking them away, and Orome, of course, also was very mighty and known to be among the darkness, but he's slaying the monsters instead of being a monster. Yeah, so some of them freak out and never come back, and then the others are just like, nah, he's cool. He's from Ammon. He's all right. And let's just go back to the story here before I get sidetracked more. But of those unhappy ones who were ensnared by Melkor, little is known of a certainty. For who of the living has descended into the pits of Autumno, or has explored the darkness of the councils of Melkor? Yet this is held true by the wise of Aresia, that all those of the Quendi who came to the hands of Melkor ere Autumno was broken, were put there in prison, and by slow arts of cruelty were corrupted and enslaved. And thus did Melkor breed the hideous race of the orcs, in envy and mockery of the elves, of whom they were afterwards the bitterest foes. For the orcs had life and multiplied after the manner of the children of Iluvatar, and not that had life of its own, nor the semblance of life, could ever Melkor make since his rebellion in the Ainulindale before the beginning, so say the wise. And deep in their dark hearts the orcs loathed the master whom they served in fear, the maker only of their misery. This it may be the vilest deed of Melkor, and the most hateful to Iluvatar. So, we get to the whole mighty introduction to the orcs. And as his common theme is to take something that either Iluvatar or the Valar have made, twist them to his own dark will, and make everything serve him. And that's basically what the orcs are a twisted version of the elves, pretty much. Kind of like, if you guys have seen the movie, it's when Saruman is talking to Lurtz about the whole like origins of the orcs. Like, do you know how the orcs first came to be? They're like, oh, they were elves once, twisted and corrupted. And he's not wrong, actually. I mean, even in this, it just says that it was, a corruption of the elves, really. Because he breed, what does it say? Melkor breed the hideous race and the mockery of the elves. So he's just like, he's just turning against Iluvatar. This is like his last straw here. He's just like, no, 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 I'm gonna do it. And then I think ever since then, the Valar are just like, no, there's no turning back for him. So, I mean, there wasn't before like a small chance, but now it's like, nah, it's gone. Back to it here. Arome tarried a while among the Quindi, and then swiftly he rode back over land and sea to Valinor, and brought the tidings to Valmar. And he spoke of the shadows that troubled Cuivennen. Viennen. I want to say that is right, but I keep thinking that I say it wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong, which I probably am. So, then the Valar rejoiced, and yet they were in doubt amid their joy. And they debated long what counsel it were best to take for the guarding of the Quendi from the shadow of Melkor. But Arome returned at once to Middle-earth and abode with the elves. Manwë sat long in thought upon Tanaquetzal, and he sought the counsel of Iluvatar. And coming then down to Valmar, he summoned the Valar to the Ring of Doom, and thither came even Ulmo from the outer sea. Then Manwë said to the Valar, "This is the counsel of Iluvatar in my heart, that we should take up again the mastery of Arda, at whatsoever cost, and deliver the Quendi from the shadow of Melkor." Then Tolkas was glad, but Aule was grieved, foreboding the hurts of the world that must come of that strife. But the Valar made ready and came forth from Aman in strength of war, resolving to assault the fortresses of Melkor and make an end. Never did Melkor forget that this war was made for the sake of the elves, and that they were the cause of his downfall. Yet they had no part in those deeds, and they know little of the riding of the might in the west against the north in the beginning of their days. So we get here that the Valar finally kind of like talk to each other. We're like, okay, well, Melkor's creations are getting pretty out of hand, so we should probably do something. And a lot of them are definitely in agreement, except for Aule, just because he probably knows everything that will happen. Well, he doesn't know it, but he figures what's going to happen next is just a lot of bad stuff. So, back to it here again. Melkor met the onset of the Valar in the northwest of Middle-earth, and all that region was much broken. But the first victory of the host of the west was swift, and the servants of Melkor fled before them to Autumno. Then the Valar passed over Middle-earth, and they set a guard over Cuivennen. And thereafter the Quendi knew nothing of the great battle of the powers, save that the earth shook and groaned beneath them, and the waters were moved, and in the north there were lights as of mighty fires. Long and grievous was the siege of Autumno, and many battles were fought before its gates, of which not but the rumor is known to the elves. And that time the shape of Middle-earth was changed, and the great sea that sundered it from Aman grew wide and deep, and it broke in upon the coasts and made a deep gulf, to the southward. Many lesser bays were made between the great gulf and Helcarax Sea far in the north, where Middle-earth and Aman came nigh together. Of these the Bay of Balar was the chief, and into it the mighty river Sirion flowed down from the new raised highlands northwards, Dorthonion and the mountains about Hithlum. The lands of the far north were all made desolate in those days, for there Autumno was delved exceeding deep, and its pits were filled with fires and with great hosts of the servants of Melkor. But at the last the gates of Autumno were broken, and the halls unroofed, and Melkor took refuge in the uttermost pit. Then Tolkas stood forth as a champion of the Valar and wrestled with him, and cast him upon his face, and he was bound with the chain Angainor that Aule had wrought, and led captive, and the world had peace for a long age. So this is not the end of the chapter here, but it's pretty close. And we get this really cool description of the Valar's battle with Melkor. And I think it's just really cool that, like, you want to picture something, but since, like, the elves were the ones who were technically the ones who wrote the Silmarillion, because it's all about elder days and whatnot, they're like, hey guys, we weren't even there, but we saw little glimpses off in the future, and the earth itself shook and groaned, and the seas were opened up, and it was ridiculous. And just like the thought of like all these of the Valar versus Melkor, and that he actually lost finally, it's just like the lore itself just seems so amazingly incredible, even though you don't even get that much. So just my thoughts there. So back to it here. Nonetheless, the Valar did not discover all the mighty vaults and caverns hidden with deceit far under the fortresses of Angband and Autumnal. Many evil things still lingered there, and others were dispersed and fled into the dark and roamed in the waste places of the world, awaiting a more evil hour, and Sauron they did not find. But when the battle was ended, and here it is again. But when the battle was ended, and from the ruin of the north great clouds arose and hid the stars, the Valar drew Melkor back to Valinor, bound hand and foot and blindfold, and he was brought to the Ring of Doom. There he lay upon his face before the feet of Manwë and sued for pardon. But his prayer was denied, and he was cast into prison in the fastness of Mandos, whence none can escape, neither Vala, nor elf, nor mortal man. Vast and strong are those halls, and they were built in the west of the land of Aman. There was Melkor doomed to abide for 3 ages long, before his cause should be tried anew, or he should plead again for pardon. Then again, the Valar were gathered in council, and they were divided in debate. For some, and of those Ulmo was the chief, held that the Quendi should be left free to walk as they would in Middle-earth, and with their gifts of skill to order all the lands and heal the hurts. But the most part feared for the Quendi in the dangerous world amid the deceits of the starlit dusk, and they were filled moreover with a love of the beauty of the Elves, and desired their fellowship. At the last, therefore, the Valar summoned the Quendi to Valinor, there to be gathered at the knees of the powers in the light of the trees forever. And Mandos broke his silence, saying, "So it is doomed." From this summons came many woes that afterwards befell. So we get here that Melkor is pretty much led to Mandos, which is like the halls of like the spirits, the slain, and all that fun stuff. And no one can escape that place. And they're like, "Yep, he's going to be there, put in timeout for a long time." And then they're like, "Okay, so what do we do with the elves?" And they're like, "Oh no, we should let them free." And then everybody's like, "Yeah, well, no, we need to be friends with them first. So we're going to do that instead." So they're like, "Yes." Back to it here. But the elves were at first unwilling to hearken to the summons, for they had yet seen the Valar only in their wrath as they went to war, save Arome alone, and they were filled with dread. Therefore Arome was sent again to them, and he chose from among them ambassadors who should go to Valinor and speak for their people, and these were Ingwe, Finwë, and Elwë, who afterwards were kings. And coming that they were filled with awe by the glory and majesty of the Valar, and desired greatly the light and splendor of the trees. Then Arome brought them back to Cuivennen, and they spoke before their people, and counseled them to heed the summons of the Valar and remove into the west. Then befell the first sundering of the Elves. For the kindred of Ingwe, and the most part of the kindreds of Finwë and Elwë, were swayed by the words of the lords, and were willing to depart and follow Arome, and these were known ever after as the Eldar, by the name that Arome gave to the Elves in the beginning, in their own tongue. But many refused the summons, preferring the starlight and the wide spaces of Middle-earth to the rumor of the trees, and these are the Avari, the unwilling, and they were sundered in that time from the Eldar, and met never again until ages were past. So we get pretty much that the elves were divided. They're like, well, okay, like we could go to Valinor, where all the Valar are, but we're also afraid of them because they're terrifying to behold. And then, and also that, hey, like, why can't we just like stay here where we just can like live in this beautiful land? It's like a paradise for us. Why would we need to leave? So they're kind of like divided between that. Back to it here again. The Eldar prepared now a great march from their first homes in the east, and they were arrayed in 3 hosts. The smallest host and the first to set forth was led by Ingwe, the most high lord of all the Elvish race. He entered into Valinor and sits at the feet of the powers, and all elves revere his name. But he came never back, nor looked again upon Middle-earth. The Vanyar were his people. They are the fair elves, the beloved of Manwë and Varda, and few among men have spoken with them. Next came the Noldor, a name of wisdom, the people of Finwë. They are the deep elves, the friends of Aule, and they are renowned in song, for they fought and labored long and grievously in the northern lands of old. The greatest host came last, and they are named the Teleri, for they tarried on the road, and were not wholly of a mind to pass from the dusk to the light of Valinor. In water they had great delight, and those that came at last to the western shores were enamored of the sea. The sea elves, therefore, they became in the land of Amen the Falmari, for they made music beside the breaking waves. 2 lords they had, for their numbers were great: Elwë Singolo, which signifies grey mantle, and Olwë his brother. These were the 3 kindreds of the Eldali, who passed at length into the uttermost west in the days of the trees, are called the Calaquendi Elves of the Light. But others of the Eldar there were who set out indeed upon the westward march, but became lost upon the long road, or turned aside, or lingered on the shores of Middle-earth, and these were for the most part of the kindred of the Teleri, as is told hereafter. They dwelt by the sea, or wandered in the woods and mountains of the world, yet their hearts were turned towards the west. Those elves the Calaquendi called the Umanyar, since they came never to the land of Amen and the Blessed Realm. But the Umanyar and the Avari alike they call the Moraquendi, elves of the darkness, for they never beheld the light that was before the sun and moon. So we get the whole 3 different names of the elves here. First, of course, are the Eldar, who makes sense. Eldar, they were the first elves to go into Valinor and whatnot. So they were the first elves to really put themselves out there. And then the Noldor, who pretty much are, I wouldn't say it's like the fighting elves, but I mean they're the ones that go against the dark servants of Melkor. That's what I kind of refer to them with, is like they're just kind of like the fighters against the darkness, even though they all are, but like the Noldar especially. And then the Teleri, who are pretty much the ones who love to stay where they are, and their minds aren't really decided on what they should do, either to go out and fight or to stay. I mean, obviously they would stay, but their minds are kind of set apart. So it's just interesting. And then of course the Elves of Darkness, which is called the Moraquendi. So they're they stay where they are, and they haven't beheld the light at all. So of course, Elves of Darkness. So back to it here again. It is told that when the hosts of the Eldali departed from Cuivennen, Orome rode at their head upon Nahar, his white horse shod with gold. And passing northward about the Sea of Helkar, they turned towards the west. Before them great clouds hung still black in the north above the ruins of war, and the stars in that region were hidden. Then not a few grew afraid and repented, and turned back, and are forgotten. Long and slow was the march of the Eldar into the west, for the leagues of Middle-earth were uncounted, and weary and pathless. Nor did the Eldar desire to hasten, for they were filled with wonder at all they saw, and by many lanes and rivers they wished to abide. And though all were yet willing to wander, many feared rather their journey's end than hoped for it. Therefore, whenever Orome departed, having at times other matters to heed, they halted and went further no more, until he returned to guide them. And it came to pass that after many years of journeying in this manner, that the Eldar took their course through a forest, and they came to a great river, wider than any they had yet seen, and beyond it were mountains whose sharp horns seemed to pierce the realm of the stars. This river, it is said, was even the river which was after called Anduin the Great, and was ever the frontier of the west lands of Middle-earth. But the mountains were the Hithagler, Hithagler, the towers of mist upon the borders of Eriador. Yet they were taller and more terrible in those days, and were reared by Melkor to hinder the riding of Orome. Now the Teleri abode long on the east bank. Oh my goodness. Apologies. Now the Teleri abode long on the east bank of that river, and wished to remain there. But the Vanyar and the Noldor passed over it, and Orome led them into the passes of the mountains. And when Orome was gone forward, the Teleri looked upon the shadowy heights, and were afraid. Then one arose in the host of Olwë, which was ever the hindmost of the road. Lenwë he was called. He forsook the westward march, and led away a numerous people, southwards down the great river, and they passed out of the knowledge of their kin until long years were past. Those were the Nondor, and they became a people apart, unlike their kin, save that they loved water and dwelt most beside falls and running streams. Greater knowledge they had of living things, tree and herb, bird and beast, than all other elves. In after years, Denethor, son of Lenwë, turned again west at last, and led a part of that people over the mountains into Beleriand ere the rising of the moon. Another interesting thing about this thing is that I actually forgot about the Nandor. It's like they were like this. They were like a forgotten part of the elves for a bit. But it's just interesting to see what they saw the mountains and what they went through already, and they're just kind of like, nah, I really don't want to go forward anymore. And the rest of the elves were like, okay, I mean, we're gonna go forward. And then the Nandor elves are just like, okay, cool, we'll just stay here for like years and years. And I guess that's what happened until eventually one of the leaders are like, nah, let's go into Beleriand. Well, then they moved again. So it feels like they were a very nomadic kind of elves in a way, where they bunkered down for a few years. But I think after their decision, they kind of rethought it. So just a thought about that. So. Back to it again. We're almost done with the chapter here. At length, the Vanyar and the Noldor came over Ered Luin, the Blue Mountains between Eriador and the westernmost land of Middle-earth, which the elves after named Beleriand, and the foremost companies passed over the Vale of Sirion and came down to the shores of the Great Sea between Drengist and the Bay of Valar. But when they beheld it, great fear came upon them, and many withdrew into the woods and highlands of Beleriand. Then Orome departed and returned to Valinor to seek the counsel of Manwë, and left them. And the host of the Teleri passed over the misty mountains and crossed the wide lands of Eriador, being urged on by Elwë Singolo, for he was eager to return to Valinor and the light that he had beheld, and he wished not to be sundered from the Noldor, for he had great friendship with Finwë their lord. Thus after many years the Teleri also came at last over Ered Luin into the eastern regions of Beleriand. There they halted and dwelt a while beyond the river Gelion. And that, finally, ends the chapter. Also, among this last part of the chapter here was the whole river Anduin, which also many of us know because it is on the Middle-earth map. It's like the biggest one that goes, it's like east of the Misty Mountains, which also many people know, even if they haven't even read it, or maybe haven't even watched it. Who knows? Just like the whole name of the Misty Mountains has become just huge among everybody, really. So, but it's interesting to actually see that, like, even in the Silmarillion era, I guess you could say, that even that was like meant as like a blockade between good and evil. So that's kind of interesting. So other than that, I don't have too many other thoughts, comments on this. I really enjoy, obviously, as the last chapter was, with the creation of the dwarves was interesting. The thing about the elves, as I mentioned earlier, with the whole thing of Orome meeting them by chance, was a very great introduction to it. It's nothing like too grand. It's just like, oh yeah, the elves are awakened. They love the stars and the water, and then they just chant upon Orome. So it's like, it's not even like this great scene where everybody's in awe, but it's just like, no, we're here. We've been here for a while. We like it here. And then also the whole splitting up of the elves. The three titles of the elves were also really cool. The Eldar, the Noldar, and the Teleri. Yeah, there it is. And then also, as I was saying again, the Nandor, and also the Morroquendi. There's just so many different segments of elves that you can probably research and go further into, which is actually my hope, that hopefully there actually is other resources out there to explore more of these elven kinds that were separated from each other on their own will, of course. So, with that all being said, there's nothing much else I can talk about because that's the end of the chapter. Hopefully you guys all enjoyed that. Maybe you guys liked the little intro there. I'm hoping so, but I will still look for a way to probably not have it as cringy or as bad as it is already. So, check my show out. That'd be great. I tried to expand it a little. I couldn't get it to Apple Podcasts. I couldn't get it there for some stupid reason. I don't know. I still gotta set it up and everything and whatnot. But so far, it should be on Anchor, should be on Spotify, and it should be on Castbox. So at least I have it those 3 platforms. So if you're on any of those, thank you for listening to my show. I greatly appreciate it. And with that all being said, as I said that about 3 times now, just stay tuned for new episodes, and may the light of Elbereth be with you all. Farewell.